Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me today as we jump into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. The reason why we pair all those games together is because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And so as the theory goes, and is kind of the mission of this show, if we go through the Pillars of Eternity series, we can understand the nuance and the writing and the lore of the world before Avowed releases and walk into that game with a better understanding and appreciation for what that game is going to be like and the stories that it'll tell. Today's episode, we're going to be looking at Rangers, the class of Rangers in games. If you've played any kind of fantasy RPG, then you might be familiar with this. The Ranger class is typically the huntsman, outdoorsman, woodsman class where you are, good at tracking animals and hunting prey, and you have some magical abilities, and you have an animal companion, blah, 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 blah. So if you've seen that character archetype in fantasy before, that's usually what a Ranger is. There's a lot more to it than that, depending on which fantasy media you're consuming, of course, but that's kind of the archetype we look at. And today, looking at this, I was actually a bit surprised to find some of the depth of the lore and some of the questions that are answered or even just implied by some of the writing that Obsidian has done for Rangers. So it was really exciting diving into that. No news for Pillars of Eternity or Avowed today, so we're going to dive straight into the lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So a Ranger is a class of character that you can play in Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2. If you've played other fantasy games where there's class selection involved, whether it's a video game or a tabletop game, you're probably familiar with the Ranger class. I know the first time that I really engaged with Rangers was in Dungeons & Dragons. So as a tabletop role-playing game, you can play as a Ranger, which is often played as someone who lives out in the woods and is good at hunting animals and tracking things and has high perception, etc., etc. Rangers in Pillars of Eternity, however, they have their own interesting lore, and they do follow that same character archetype, being people who are out in the woods, they're good at hunting, and they have animal companions. There's a little bit more that goes on behind the story of what makes a Ranger, rather than just a typical woodsman or huntsman. The in-game description for Ranger is as follows. Rangers are warriors of the woodlands and masters of the hunt. Always partnered with soul-bonded animal companions, they can be found in wild spaces all over the world. As their lifestyles often tend toward independence and isolation, it is rare for Rangers to become an integral part of a large fighting force, though they are often employed as scouts and guides. The key thing of note here that we're going to discuss is the soul-bonded animal companion. That's going to be the flavor of the Ranger in Pillars of Eternity that makes it unique compared to Rangers of other places. Now, it does say here that Rangers don't typically form integral parts of large fighting forces. There are Rangers that are important parts of society. One of the companions that you meet in the first Pillars of Eternity game is a notable member from her society back home. But it should also be noted that she is not at home, so she's clearly not needed there. Rangers are warriors and of the woodlands and masters of the hunt, and that's the thing to remember for the character archetype, but the unique flavor is the soul-bonded animal companion. And so that's kind of the build you're going to want to go for with a Ranger. You're going to want to be very likely a sharpshooter with some sort of ranged weapon. They typically use bows and crossbows, but they can use firearms or even magical implements. And so this is typically the kind of thing that we'll be used to seeing with Rangers. But as I've said, the thing that's important is their animal companion. You see, as I mentioned in the description, they are partnered with a soul-bonded animal companion. And so when a Ranger has an animal companion that they form this bond with, their souls are actually united to a very deep level. On the Pillars of Eternity Wikipedia fandom website, it actually says at one point, they are assisted in their efforts by their animal companion, incredibly tough and loyal creatures with whom Rangers form lifelong bonds who share their lives, literally, with their masters. Rangers often choose as companions creatures with whom they share a strong natural affinity. The process of soul bonding connects Ranger and Beast to such a degree that both entities share stamina, health, and eventually death. It is believed that rangers bind themselves to animals in which they were recently or most vividly incarnated. Once bonded, ranger and companion never part unless one dies of natural causes. In some cases, the feelings of loss in a ranger can be so great that it takes years before they form a new bond. Evidence has suggested that the ranger-animal bond can outlast even death, which may be a contributing factor to their shared mortality. The soul affinity between the two runs so deep that they are united in all but a shared body, and one could hardly abandon his or her mortal existence without the other following suit. So this paragraph on the website, which cites the Pillars of Eternity guidebook as the source of this information, just kind of gives you the depth to which that a ranger and an animal companion are bonded. It doesn't say what the process of soul bonding is. It just says the process of soul bonding connects them. But it's the degree to which they are connected that's important, not the process itself. It's connected so much to the point that if one dies, it's not like one dies and then the other dies automatically, but they tend to go out at the same time because they are so intimately connected in that way. Like their souls are almost, for all intents and purposes, bonded into one soul, and then they just have these two bodies. I'm being a little bit poetic or dramatic about it, but like that's kind of the idea that we're getting when we read things like this. The idea that a ranger will often pick an animal companion of an animal that they were recently incarnated as is an interesting one. Because if you're not yet aware, I mean, I say it all the time on this show, that the world of Eora runs on a cycle of reincarnation, which means that you die, your soul leaves, goes to the beyond, and then comes back later into a new body. That's how reincarnation works in this world. But bodies don't remember their previous lives. The soul just happens to have those previous lives, but you don't remember them in the brain, in the memories that you have in your current body. But it's suggested that a ranger's connection to their previous life as a certain animal will bring them to have an animal companion of the same type, and that's where that connection can come from. This kind of lore, it makes the gameplay for a ranger so much more interesting, because the first time I played a ranger, I just was like, okay, yeah, it's a woodsman with a fox running around with you, or a deer, or what have you. But now, when playing a ranger or having an animal companion as a ranger, you start to realize the link that you form between this character and their animal, like just how tied they are, the stories that they have. And it makes sense, too, when you think about what a ranger is. A ranger is often someone who is out in the woods by themselves, and this animal companion is their only source of company. You know, I could see some sort of like Hollywood tearjerker inspirational summer feel-good movie about a ranger and their animal companion, and how they're the only ones that are friends with each other, and they're, you know, stumble across something in the woods and whatever, and the narrative unfolds. But, you know, like I could see the relationship between this person and their animal being a key part in a story, and it's a story that matters and that people can relate with. I mean, a lot of us have pets, but none of you are soul bonded to them, obviously. But, you know, like we know what that feels like. We know what it means to have a connection with an animal in that way, and this is kind of taking that idea and pushing it one step further for the sake of the fantasy. And I love that. It adds so much more depth to the lore and even the gameplay when you get to watch the game go on. It's no surprise that the power source for a ranger is called Bond. I've only talked about this a few times, but in Pillars of Eternity 2, every class has a power source, right? So fighters use the power source of discipline to channel their abilities. Wizards use the power source of Arcana to power their abilities. In Rangers, they use a power source called Bond. And that's just the gamey way of like measuring how much power a ranger has in combat or out of combat. But narratively speaking, it's this idea that the bond and relationship that a ranger has with their animal companion is actually the source by which they channel their abilities. Because remember, like, people of these classes, they're doing things that not everyone can always do. They're infusing magic into some of the abilities they have, or they're pushing themselves and performing abilities that would otherwise not very easily happen. And these things don't just come out of nowhere. You know, a ranger doesn't just shoot an arrow with a magical ability because it can. Like, there is a narrative reason for why those abilities can occur. And in this sense, it makes sense that the connection between two souls is the thing that powers and fuels that magical energy. Because magic in the world of Eora is fundamentally fueled by soul energy, known as essence. And so the stronger the companion relationship with the animal, the longer they've been together, the more suffering or whatever they go through, I suppose, the closer they get, the more bonded they are, the more powerful their connection, therefore the more powerful the abilities they have. At least that's kind of like the idea that gets across here when you start to think out the implications of what this is all saying. There's more than just one type of ranger out there. There are subclasses of rangers. There are different types, there are different groups and classes that you can put rangers into. In Pillars of Eternity 2, they introduced subclasses into the game, which, besides giving you mechanical differences for how these classes work, it also gave you a bit of insight to how rangers can differ from one another, how one ranger can be a completely different ranger from someone else. So we have 5 subclasses to look at, one of which we cannot choose ourselves. It's unique to one of our companions. But here are the 5 subclasses that we learn about from Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. And keep in mind, there can be more. These are just the 5 that were made for that game. We have Ghost Heart, Sharpshooter, Stalker, Arcane Archer, and then Gunhawk, which is unique to the companion Maya Rua, someone that you can have in your party for the second game. Ghost Heart is someone, it's described as a ranger whose animal companion have died but remain in the in-between as spirits to serve their masters. Ghost Hearts can summon the spirit of their companion in combat for a limited duration. And so we've already talked about the link between ranger and animal companion being so intense that it even transcends death to a point. So in this situation, there's a ranger, animal companion, the animal has died, and it's gone through the shroud from the here, which is the mundane existence that you and I would live in. And before it goes into the beyond, which is kind of like the afterlife of this world, there's a little slit in between the here and the beyond called the in-between. This is in between life and death. And so it sounds like the animal companion's spirit stays in the in-between and offers their services from there in some way, shape, or form. We don't know why the animal spirit stays there. Perhaps it's waiting for its master. Perhaps it just can't stand to be away from its master, and so it's willing to just stay in the in-between indefinitely until they meet up again. Who knows? But this is the idea behind a ranger. I like subclasses like this because it makes you ask questions about rangers. It shows you that Obsidian was sat down and thought, okay, ranger, animal companion, but what happens if, let's say, the animal companion dies? How does their connection work now? Well, they've made a subclass for it. So I like that it's really thought out. A lot of this stuff is very thoughtfully attended to. Sharpshooters. Sharpshooter rangers focus their attention entirely on ranged combat, relying on their animal companions to provide defense for them. Their penetration and accuracy with ranged weapons superior, but they take more time to recover between attacks and have poor deflection. Okay, so this one is basically just for those who want to play a sharpshooter archer. All right, there's nothing lore-wise here that we need to know. It's interesting to note that and you know this if you've played a ranger in the games, that if you have an animal companion, you want to choose an animal that is going to complement your combat abilities, right? So like if you're a weak and squishy human, but you want to keep people away from you, you can choose an animal companion that is more like a tank, so that animal will take a lot of the aggression from enemies, and then you can pick them off from a distance. And sharpshooter might be a useful subclass for you in that sense. Stalker subclass have an especially strong bond with their animal companion and excel when they are close to each other, but suffer as soon as they are separated by any distance. So this is thinking out the implication that, like, okay, a ranger and their animal companion are so strongly bonded that they are actually more powerful than the average ranger. However, they can't stand to be away from each other, and they're actually weakened by that. So it's another implication of the soul bonding that can happen as a result. Arcane archers are a rare few that find themselves gifted in both physical ability and more cerebral arcane talents. Arcane archers are among those few and apply their innate aptitude with magic by temporarily infusing spells into their projectiles. More commonly seen among traveling performers during archery contests, these skilled individuals are both admired and reviled for their abilities. So this is just a subclass created so that if you want to play someone who has magic and ranged physical attacks, that you can do that. So it's kind of there for those who want to role play as that kind of character, which is fun. Honestly, I love that stuff. I love being able to implement magic into any kind of class. But nothing lore-wise here about the relationship between the ranger and their animal companion. The last subclass that we're going to talk about is Gunhawk, and it's a unique subclass that only Maya Rua, one of your companions from the second game, has. Gunhawks are described as a type of ranger unique to Rawatai, who use hawk companions to complement their sharpshooting skills. So Gunhawk Rangers are actually part of the Rawataian army, I would assume, Rauatai being one of the great empires of the world who have been around for hundreds of years, establishing dominance and exploring the world of Eora. They probably have rangers in their army or in their employ in some way, and gunhawks, I guess they must have found, are a reliable method by which to have a ranger within your army. And so the idea here is that you have an infantry person, or you have a soldier, whoever they are, and they're trained with sharpshooting skills, which means guns. So it's not bows and arrows in this case. This is using an arquebus, very likely, some sort of long-range firearm. And specifically, they use hawks to be able to bond them together. So you get the ranger, and then they get a hawk from their local native area, I would assume. Who knows? I don't know where they get these hawks from. They bond them together, and that's who you have. A hawk, I guess, would make a lot of sense if you are trying to train a particular regiment into your soldiers. As well, a hawk is one of the few creatures I imagine that would be helpful with such a long-distance weapon like that. Obviously, you could justify that any creature would do, but I mean, if you're shooting a gun and it's shooting very far away, a hawk makes a lot of sense, especially when you also consider that Rauataian armies, the Rauataian army is actually mostly a navy. And so you want to have an animal that can go from here to there and then fly back to a ship. You know, you don't want something that once it falls in the ocean, you have to rescue it, or something that lives in the ocean so it can't be on a ship with you. In an effort to kind of get some creative juices flowing, because I do have a question for you guys listening to this episode, but I'm going to get to it in a little bit. I have a couple of item descriptions that I want to go through with you. And actually, it's not the descriptions themselves. For context, by the way, whenever you play a lot of RPGs, often item descriptions, especially for unique items, will contain lore within those descriptions. However, in this case, I'm going to be looking at a couple of amulets within Pillars of Eternity 1 that are only usable by rangers. And they don't imply anything great or hidden, but it gets me thinking more about what implications that this soul bonding phenomenon has and kind of stuff like that. I think about this thing a lot as someone who is trying to get into game mastering for Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, or something in Pillars of Eternity. I like to ask these questions of like, what does this kind of stuff imply? So the first one is Stalker's Torque. It's an amulet, and what it does is it causes this benefit known as Stalker's Link bonus. And the idea that I'm understanding here is that this amulet that you're wearing enhances the soul bond in some way, shape, or form. It just kind of boosts it a little. And what this does is it increases the potency of your Stalker's Link ability, which is already something you as a ranger have when you and your animal companion are targeting the same person. The second one is called the Torque of Defiance. And again, this one can only be worn by rangers. And the idea here is that it gives you a buff to ward off charisma-based attacks, is how I'm going to put it. So like being charmed, confused, or dominated. All of these spells being put against you, all these status updates being put against you as a person are things of the mind. Charming you to be a friend with someone even though you're not, being confused, or being completely dominated so someone's controlling you. This amulet somehow causes this to happen by enhancing the bond you have with your animal companion. So it's almost like this soul bond that you have with an animal companion also increases your cognitive skills. It increases your defense against will-based attacks, things that attack your mind. And it's interesting to think out the implications of why might that be? What about this connection causes that? Is it that you have a little bit of your animal's mindset in you? You have a little bit more animalistic thinking? Maybe you're a bit more grounded in the way you think, and you find yourself in reverie that way sometimes. Who knows, right? Like, how much of the animal's mind bleeds into yours in a sense, right? Like, do you start to think like an animal? Do you understand things a little bit more now that your soul is bonded in this way? I'd be really interested in seeing where that goes. The Ranger is a really fun character to play. Honestly, I love playing a Ranger. One of my most favorite Pillars of Eternity playthroughs was a party of all Rangers and all godlikes of different forms. And the battlefield was just a mess. There were so many NPCs running around. I had a ranger companion and a companion for each, so that it was twice as big as it needed to be. But it was a lot of fun, and it was really cool to see just the different strategies that can be involved there. And it got a lot more fun in Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire when I could subclass each one of them. I did, however, and please don't do this. I did, however, make the mistake of making that super goofy, fun ranger party playthrough my first turn-based playthrough in Pillars of Eternity 2, which that gets really bogged down when you have to control each individual companion and each individual animal companion. Well, it takes a while. So maybe if you're going to do that, don't do turn-based mode. But speaking of how Rangers work in games, how might this influence Avowed?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
Well, we already know from information that we're not going to be selecting classes in Avowed. So you're not going to start the character creation in the beginning of the game by selecting the ranger class. There's going to be skills and abilities of some sort that you build your character up towards as you play the game. Now, any controversy aside on what you prefer, we're just going to set that aside for now and talk about whether or not ranger is going to be included in the game of Avowed. Now, obviously, we don't know for sure if any ranger abilities will be featured in the game. The thing that is the most important, however, I believe, is the animal companion thing. Are we going to be able to have that? And unfortunately, there's no way of knowing. We know for a fact that there are going to be companions in the game. You, as a main player character, you're going to have, it seems like you're going to have 2 people running around with you at all times. But whether or not you can have an animal companion, we don't know. My guess is that we're probably not. And the reason I think that is because, well, and this is taking the lore perhaps way more seriously than the game will necessitate, but the idea behind a ranger and their animal companion is that it's a lifelong, deep, soul-bonded experience, which means that if you're playing Avowed and you have a ranger soul bond connection to an animal that you have as a companion, then it would make sense to me, lore-wise, that you can't dismiss that animal from your party. You have to leave them back at your home base or on your ship or whatever's going to be the main hub for Avowed. If there is one, you can't have your animal companion with you at all times if you want to switch out for a different character. And for me, that doesn't make sense based on what the Rangers are like. So lore-wise, it seems less likely to be true. As well, that would mean that the developers at Obsidian have to do all this extra programming for one kind of unique, not niche, but like a thing that people might not use as much. Not everyone will want to play as a ranger. It's a cool idea, but they can very easily just have an animal companion that you're like best buds with rather than someone that you're soul bonded with. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that level of connection to animal companions is going to exist, but I could be surprised by that. And they might decide that, you know what, they want you to have ranger abilities with an animal companion, but they don't want to bog you down with the whole soul-bounded thing and force you to keep an animal companion with you at all times. It's their game. If they want to upend the rules a little bit for the sake of making gameplay fun, then they can do that. And so they very well might. I'm leaning more on the side that they probably won't. I wouldn't be surprised to see an animal companion in the game in some way, shape, or form, whether it's just like a pet that stays back somewhere, or it's someone that you can actually bring along with you as a companion, or even just like a small tag-along kind of thing. I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that. But I think if any of the ranger abilities were going to be transferred from Pillars of Eternity into Avowed, it would be more of the ranged bow kind of stuff, like any abilities that have to do with sharpshooting or arcane archery, perhaps something like that. I think those particular abilities, they might be transferred over because I could see Obsidian wanting to provide that to us, the players, to be able to choose how we build our character class as we go through the game. And there are going to be a lot of people who want to play an archer, want to play an archer in the shadows, want to play an archer with magic, right? So I could see a lot of ranger abilities actually being taken over from that and kind of slumped into either a rogue or druid category. We don't know how they're setting up their skill trees yet, but that's just kind of my speculation. Before signing off on today's episode, I have a couple questions for you. One, what ways might the ranger be involved in Avowed that you guys think? Like, how do you guys think ranger might be involved in Avowed? And secondly, what other things about this soul bond can you think of that are important? Like, what other speculative questions can you come up with? You know, like we saw with the Ghost Heart subclass, that it stems from the question of, okay, well, what if the animal dies, but they stay connected and don't pass all the way into the day? You know, like what happens when the animal companion dies? Is there still a connection? And that subclass explores that question. And those item descriptions that I read kind of ask questions about like, well, in what ways does this soul bond affect you on a day-to-day basis? Like, how does it actually affect you, you know, where the rubber hits the road kind of thing? I love questions like these. I'm always interested in this kind of speculative questioning and this theory crafting, if you will. So if anyone out there listening to this, if you have questions or if you have any thoughts or theories on how the soul bond could further affect you or the animal, or how it might work or what the process might be, send me emails on your fan theories. Because this stuff is really cool, and sometimes it leads to great narratives, and I want to hear some of that stuff. So send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, as well if you guys have any questions or criticisms, etc., etc. You can follow this podcast's Twitter, or I guess X account. I'm still going to call it Twitter because I don't care, at World of Eora. So yesterday, if I had recorded this episode yesterday, I would have told you sorrowfully that I am no longer playing Baldur's Gate because I just can't handle it. My PC is in Act 2 and I can't run the maps. The frame rates hit 0. I have a very baby PC, so I can't play it, especially knowing what Act 3 will be. But today I'm recording it, and happy coincidence, sort of happy, I am playing it through GeForce Now. So for those of you who want to play Baldur's Gate 3 but you don't have the PC to handle it, I highly recommend buying the game on Steam and then subscribing to GeForce Now's cloud gaming service. Just get their priority membership. You don't need to have anything crazier than that, in my opinion. Honestly, you could do the free tier if you want as well, but you're not going to get very far in that game. For a game that's 200 hours, it's going to take you a long time to do. But by doing that, you'll be able to play this game over the cloud service. And I think games like Baldur's Gate are perfect for cloud streaming services because lag isn't really a huge issue. The click of a mouse in a first-person shooter needs to be really, really quick. There can't be any delay between the press of the button and the action in the game. But when it's something like Baldur's Gate, it works really well. And so I'd recommend doing that any day. I am now playing the game on high settings, and it's super responsive, and I get to experience the game it was meant to be played rather than on my baby PC, which I will admit was kind of slowing it down and making it not as great of an experience. So I'd recommend doing that. I did sadly have to repurchase the game all over again, so I've bought 2 copies of this stupid game now. If I could find a way to gift my GOG copy to anyone, I would, but I don't know how. So in the meantime, I'm just going to hope and pray for a refund. Anyways, that's all for today's lore. Thanks everyone for listening to the episode. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.